Today we're going to start a new series. Our previous episodes were about traveling in the Arctic with dogs, and there were some training episodes in there for the dog trainers out there. You can go back in my series and probably catch those as well. But today we're going to start something new. Um, I want to go back in time when life was different. It was simple. It was extremely physically tough, but we weren't distracted by all this computers and iPhones. It was 40 years ago when I ventured into northern Canada, mountainous country of northern British Columbia, beautiful forest surrounded by just ponds and lakes and rivers. And I was hired to build houses. I was a construction worker, and I was to build houses in the native villages. And so I moved into the village. It's a small village, maybe a population of 45, 50 people. And people were very suspicious of me. I'm white and they are natives. And at that time in Canada, there was a high friction between white people and natives. And so everyone pretty much gave me the cold shoulder. But nonetheless, I worked every day and did the best I could. And one day, it was on a weekend, I went for a walk down the river and kind of enjoy the countryside. It was fall time. The leaves were falling off the trees. The smell of fall was in the air. I'm sure you all know that beautiful, crispy smell. The sounds of walking on dried leaves and the sounds of the river starting to ice up. Um, and there in the distance, I saw an old gentleman. He had a fishing pole and he had a little dog beside him, and his dog was washing him every cast he made in the river, and obviously waiting for him to catch something, hopefully. And as I became closer, he, the old gentleman, kind of looked at me and picked up his fishing pole, walked maybe another 20 or 30 feet up the river, and started fishing again. So obviously, okay, I take the hint. He doesn't want anything to do with me, so I'll continue on. I'll walk past him and say hello. And as I became closer, when I got closer to him, his dog came running to me. And of course, that started a scene. The old gentleman was trying to call his dog back, but I don't know why dogs are attracted to me. Maybe it's a smell. Maybe I smell like a bone. But so I says, I walked the dog back to him. I says, "Here's your dog. Sorry to distract you." And he looked at me and says, "It's because of you white people I'm down here fishing with a fishing pole." I said, "Well, I have nothing to do with this." He said, "Well, our government told us we can't put salmon nets in the river anymore. And to make up for that law, they give us cases and cases of canned salmon. And it tastes like crap, and my dog won't eat it. So I'm down here fishing for trout so my dog can have something to eat." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. That's terrible." And he said, "What are you doing here anyhow?" I said, "Well, I'm building houses in the villages." He says, "Oh, you're building my neighbor's house." I said, "Yes, I am." you know, so he's kind of sized me up and raked his eye. He only had one eye, and he was very, very old. And he says, "Let's go have a cup of coffee. I got something that I want to ask you." I said, "Oh, okay." So we left the river and walked up the bank, kind of a crumbly, sandy bank. And well, he made it up the bank really like he was light footed, like he was walking on air. And I kind of spun out on the sand and kind of got my footing on the grass. And then there was a real narrow, winding trail through the woods, and it came out to a dirt road. Then across the dirt road was a little log cabin, and that was his place. And so he opened the door for a dog named Barney. The dog ran in, little tiny thing. And he says, "My name's Peter, by the way." I said, "Oh, nice to meet you, Peter. My name's Joe." The natives didn't talk a whole lot, but when they spoke, they didn't waste any words. And so he says, "I'll cook some coffee and I have some bannock." Bannock is fried bread. And so I sat down at the table. On his table was a rifle, old World War I 303 British rifle. I'm sure many of you probably aren't familiar with that old rifle, but there might be a few of you out there that's know collector's items, rifles. And so I sat down and he threw some wood in the fire and it started taking off, started crackling, and smoke started coming out of the rusty cracks in his wood stove, kind of filled the room with a kind of a sweet spruce smell smoke. It was kind of a nice setting. And it was just a small 2-room cabin. I could see in the other room that there's a mattress on the floor and very little furniture. Yeah, there's a couple of chairs and a table and refrigerator. Actually had electricity, and that was about it. I mean, a stove to cook on. Very, very simple. But I could tell his rifle was a precious piece of equipment he had. It was laying on a towel, and it was, it was clean. It was sparkling clean, although it was dark. You could tell the wood on the stock was very well worn down from many, many years of handling. And beside the table was a packboard, old wooden packboard made out of canvas and wood lashed together, and very dark, obviously blood-stained from packing many, many moose. He was a moose hunter. And of course, I was curious of how old Peter was. I mean, he didn't look like he was getting around too well, and so I didn't want to ask him how old he was directly. I was just curious. I says, "Peter, how long have you been using that moose pack? I bet you packed a lot of moose on that." He says, "I've had that for at least 70 years. I said, "Holy smokes. How old are you?" I said. He says, "I don't know." He said, "But I remember seeing my first white man on the grease trail." I said, "What is the grease trail?" He looked at me with that one eye like I was dumber than 100 dead chickens. Then he explained to me that the grease trail was a trail they took every spring, mid-May, with all their furs, and they would carry them to the coast and trade their furs for candlefish oil. And the candlefish oil, which is basically another word, is smelt. What the Tlinkits would do, they would catch huge amounts of smelt, and then they would cook it and get the oil out of the fish, and they would use that oil to trade to the interior Indians who were lacking oil, and in return they would get the furs that they can't get on the coast. And so the whole tribe would make them basically move to the coast every summer. And Peter, when he was a child, went with his mom. His dad had passed away. He said he doesn't really remember his dad. But he told me him and his mom were packing all their furs to the coast, and they had a few dogs. They loaded up the dogs with some furs and their belongings, and his mom had a big pack on, and he had a pack on as well. They had to have all their food and equipment to camp for 2 or 3 weeks for the trip one way, then 2 or 3 weeks on the way back. And so he said they were walking along the trail, and they fell way behind the rest of the tribe, so they were kind of alone. And then he saw a bunch of men coming towards him, and they're all wearing kind of black clothing and carrying huge packs, all bent over like they're broken backed. And so him and his mom ran into the woods. They were scared, never seen anything like it. And they hid real close in the thick brush and watched the men go by. They were stumbling and chattering and talking. And he said they were so close to him that he could see the sweat rolling off one of the men's forehead. He had long beard. He'd never seen a person with a beard before. And they were terrified. He was terrified. But his mom held on to him and she placed her hand over his mouth so he wouldn't make any noise. So the men went by, and then his mom was so terrified from that experience, so shook up that they decided not to continue on. They turned around and went back to the village. And this apparently had happened in the gold rush, maybe 1899, 1900. So he was quite old. Peter was very, very old. But the reason the kettlefish were so important, they needed that oil because Peter and his mom and mainly the whole village, they lived off of moose meat. And moose is very lean meat. And so they needed that oil, that fish oil, to mix in with their moose meat so they could digest it. Um, and it was very important for them. And so here they were without any oil for the meat. But Peter said later on his mom shot a big fat bear and they rendered down the fat and used that oil. Now his mom was a trapper, and that's what she did for a living. And this was their culture. They trapped beaver, pine marten, lynx, wolverine, and wolves. And they sold the furs to fur buyers or trade them to the Clinkets. And that's how they lived. One of the stories that was really, really fascinating to hear about his mom is Peter told me that one time they're walking through the woods. I wasn't exactly sure what time of the year. It sounded like fall because he said the sounds of the trees in the wind were kind of making a rushing sound. And he said he was behind his mom. His mom was carrying a big backpack. I'm assuming just full of traps and whatnot, getting ready to set out the trap line. And he said she stepped over a log, and he said it was like slow motion. About 100 feet away, a bear just jumped out of the brush and started charging her. And he said, quicker than lightning, she pulled up her rifle. Now she only had a 22 Hornet. So if you're not familiar with these rifles, they're only a single shot 22 caliber, very small bullet, not much power. Not the kind we use nowadays that would drop a bear with one shot. I mean, we use some pretty big firearms nowadays, and it's killing a bear isn't a problem. But in those days, it was a tough deal. So, as the bear charged, she pulled that rifle and she kneeled down. And as that bear got closer, she placed that bullet right in the bear's mouth, killed it instantly. I looked up at Charlie as soon as he finished his story, and I could see a tear coming out of that one eye. Then he quickly turned his back to me and started cooking coffee. I could tell he loved his mom, and he sure missed her. It's interesting how, regardless how old you are, you have memories of your loved ones like that. So then about a minute later, I heard the water boiling for the coffee, and he took some coffee grounds, put them in the pot that was boiling, and put some cold water in it, and letting the coffee grounds settle to the bottom. This was the old way of cooking coffee. We didn't have espressos and all that garbage. Basically, what you did, just threw some grounds in a pot in boiling water, and as soon as it stopped boiling, you put cold water in it, and all the grounds sink to the bottom, and you have coffee. Usually in a pretty good sized pot. So Peter, he had a big tin cup, which is mostly used in the North Country. The reason being, you can put that tin cup on the wood stove and keep your coffee warm. Seems like life revolved around coffee, and with the natives, it revolved around coffee, moose meat, and fried bread. They called bannock, and of course they loved their sugar. I noticed. So he placed a big tin cup of coffee on the table, steaming out, smelled really good. And he put a big dish of sugar next to it. He says, "Here's the sugar for it." I said, "No, thanks, Charlie. I don't use sugar." And his eye got really big. He says, "You don't use sugar?" I said, "No, Charlie. I don't like sugar in my coffee. I like it black. Tastes good that way." He says, "You're a crazy white man. Everyone uses sugar." And little did I know that crazy white man would become my nickname forevermore in that village. They didn't call me Joe anymore. Everybody started calling me Crazy White Man over a cup of coffee. It's strange how little things grow into big things. So he cooked up some fried bread, and the way they do that is just basically water, flour, and sugar. Make a dough, and they throw it in a pan of fried grease, and there you got a biscuit. It's called bannock. And at the time, bread made me sick. I have gluten intolerance, and I knew that if I ate that bread, I'd be sick. So I kind of nibbled on it, and he says, "What's the matter with you, crazy white man? You don't even like my bread? You don't like my sugar and coffee? What's the matter with you?" I said, "Charlie, I get sick of bread. I can't." Well, he said, "Here, let me get you a can of salmon, and I'll see if you can eat that." I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot." And he opened a can of salmon for me straight out of the government rations. And boy, it stunk. I mean, it stunk. But I was trying to be polite. So I took a little tiny piece of that. And as soon as I got it in my mouth, I mean, it tastes like crap. He smiled, the biggest smile. I've never seen a man with so many gums in one tooth. I think he only had one tooth. That's it. And he smiled ear to ear. He didn't say anything. He just turned his back, and I knew he was laughing. So I lowered the can to Barney, who was sitting at my feet there, and he took one sniff of that salmon and walked in the other room. So, yeah, I got his point about the government issue salmon. It's a shame. It's a really shame. They take a people's tradition away and replace it with, well, basically crap. So I asked Charlie, I said, "Okay, you invited me over here. What did you want to ask me? Down on the river, you said you want to ask me something. What is it?" He said, "Crazy white man, you look like you could pack a load." "What do you mean pack a load, Charlie?" "Packboard, moose meat." I said, "Oh, of course. Of course. Everything revolves around moose." Yeah, Charlie. I used to play football and other sports. Um, sure, I can pack. What do you need, Charlie? You got a moose someplace you need packed out? He says, "No, crazy white man. I need you to go get me one. Go catch me a moose." They always said catch something. They never said kill. They never said shoot. They always said catch. He said, "Go catch me a moose." I said, "Oh, okay." Well, where do I start? I don't even have a rifle. I don't have anything. I just got here. He says, "Go down to Hudson Bay store where we sell the furs, right down on Main Street, and Buy yourself a rifle. He says, the best one to get is old 303 British. He said, they're the best ones. All right. Then what? He said, well, here, I'll draw you a map. He says, this is where the moose are. I said, oh, okay. You know right where the moose are. All right. So he pulled out an old piece of paper and pencil, and with his knuckled arthritis hands, just huge arthritis hands. Oh, he must have been in a lot of pain. So he scribbled me a map of the area, of the village, and a trail, and it went to his. They call it Peter's Swamp, and this is where Peter probably hunted his entire life. He said, "You get in the swamp, it's thick. The moose like that." He said, "You can hear the water when the moose walking. It's puddles of water everywhere." He says, "Wear your hip waders because it's going to be wet." He says, "When you hear the footsteps of a moose or hear them running through the brush," he says, "run to your right, about 100 feet, 200 feet, and just stop. Hide behind some brush and listen and wait. And those moose, when they circle around to see what startled them, they're curious, and they're right-handed," he said. "They always go to the right, and you'll be right there to catch them. Then we can have some moose meat." He said, "I normally would go myself, but I have other things I need to do." But I knew better than that. Peter probably didn't weigh 120 pounds. I don't think he had much of a chance of packing too much meat, so I felt sorry for him, actually. But, we all get old. And I'm sure in his day he was quite a packer, so I figured he was too proud to ask his relatives for this favor. It's probably easier to ask a stranger. I'm not sure why he asked me, but he did. And, well, the good Lord works in mysterious ways, they say. And it worked out pretty good for him. And it was a really exciting adventure for me as well. Being so young, I've never been around this type of environment, so it worked out well. So I went home to the cabin. I had a little one-room cabin that the company supplied me with. Wasn't much, but I had wood stove in it, and a bed, and a bunk, and it was enough for me. So Monday night after work, I went down to the Hudson Bay store to buy a rifle. And the town had little wooden boardwalks you walk down. It was like the old western town it reminded me of that you see on TV. And I walked in the Hudson Bay store, and there's a gentleman in there. He looked like the owner. I mean, he was probably, 65, 70 years old, weathered face, white hair, long mustache. And he was just dusting the shelves off and kind of tending to the displays. So the Hudson Bay store, they were the main stores in the northern regions of Canada. They supplied all the traps, the rifles, ammunition, winter gear, and you name it. They had pots and pans, everything you would need to live out in the bush. And the gentleman seemed like he spoke with a French accent, and he asked me what I would like, and I said, "Well, I need to buy a rifle." He says, "Oh, so okay, well, what you looking for?" I said, "I need something that'll kill a moose." He said, "Oh, well, the most popular rifle around here is the 303 British, but we do have some 30-06s. If you want a 30-06, I said, "No, I think Peter uses a 303 British." He said, "Oh," he said, "You know Peter?" I said, yeah, Peter Charlie. Yeah, that's him, Peter Charlie. Boy, he says, he was quite a hunter in his day. They called him the Lucky Hunter. And he continued, you know, one thing about the natives, they never brag about their hunting skills. They always say it's luck. And they go out there and they spend days and days in the woods hunting, and some of them are very successful. And he says, you know, they never say it's because of their own skill. He says, I got lucky today and I caught me something. You know, he said a lot of natives will come and he says, I got lucky today and I caught me 10 beaver, or I caught me a moose. I detected from the gentleman that he was really fond of the natives. And, you know, you have to be. You know, they lived a pretty tough life and lived off the land, um, unforgiving land sometimes. But as they got older, you know, they couldn't hunt anymore, like Peter. And he could still hunt, but couldn't carry anything, couldn't pack much. And part of the hunting is packing home the meat. So he laid out a bunch of weapons on the counter, and he picked up a old 303 British, and it's just a beautiful rifle, nice wood to stock. And he says, "This is the best one here." He says, "I'll sell it to you for $50." I says, $50? I said, "Yeah, sure." That's quite a deal. I never bought a rifle for $50. He says, "I'll throw in a box of shells for you." He says, "I know you're hunting for Peter, and I know he's not doing too well. So he needs all the help he can get." I said, "Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that." I said, "By the way, you wouldn't happen to have any packboard, do you?" He says, "Oh, of course." He says, "I can give you one for $20. And these are really good packboards made out of oak and canvas. And you can fit a whole hind quarter of a moose on one. So if you can carry it, it'll pack it." I said, "Well, thank you." So I gave him the money and picked up my packboard and rifle and the shells and walked out the door, walked down the boardwalk, and there were the loggers were getting off the bus going to their tavern. And they call it the Crummy. It's actually a little school bus that carries all the loggers around. Lumberjacks. I call them loggers because that's what they called them back then. But they're lumberjacks. And, you know, when you think of a lumberjack, you think of a man that's, you know, big, strong, 250-pound guy, you know, 6'2". No, lumberjacks are just, no, they're small. They're lean. They're lean, mean working machines. I mean, these guys are the most of athletic of the population. I mean, you had to be a super athlete to survive in the logging industry back in those days. And all they did was, you know, they literally had to run around the woods. You know, sometimes packing heavy loads, sometimes with chainsaws. I mean, I could tell you all about it because I was one, and it was a tough job, very dangerous. I've seen many men killed out there, but that is for another story, another time. Right now, we're going to talk about Peter Charlie. And so I strolled home, went to the cabin, and I plan on taking the following day off of work, Tuesday, and head out and hunt in Peter's Swamp. And so early in the morning, I got up, put on my boots, my hip waders. Good thing I had them on. The dew was real heavy in the grass that morning, and my hip waders were just wet as can be just walking out there, just from the dew. Stars were out, nice crispy air, beautiful country. You could see the peaks of the mountains in the moonlight. It was really nice. Miss those days actually. But so I walked along, found a trail behind the village, and followed it with a flashlight. Followed my beam of a flashlight. And when I started getting close to the swamp, I just kind of sat down, let it get daylight a little bit so I could see where I was going. And as I entered the swamp, it was thick, and the odor smelled like cedar. And it's kind of a pleasant odor. I don't know if you've ever smelled cedar, but it's a good smell. It's a good cedar. Cedar is kind of a soothing smell, it seems like. So I entered the forest and walked as slow as I could, trying not to make any noise, but pretty hard to do when you're such thick brush. And I was in there for a few hours. It's getting very light, and I was concerned, maybe I'm in the wrong place. Maybe there aren't any moose around here. And then about that time I thought that, I heard a splash in the water, and I could hear a thump, 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 thump. I said, oh, that sounds like something. Probably a moose, obviously. It sounded like a pretty hard thump. Something running. I've been around a lot of deer in my time, and you can hear them running through the woods. Well, this was a little bit a deeper sound, so I figured, probably a moose. Then I thought about Peter, and I said, oh. Then I envisioned in my mind's eye of him telling me what to do. I remember that. He pulled his long gray hair away from that eye that was sewn shut. First time I saw it, because he always had that hair over it. His eye was just totally sewn shut. And he said, now you run to the right, 100, 200 feet. I was thinking of that. And I said, all right. It sounds ridiculous, but I'll do it for the sake of Peter Charlie. So I ran to the right, quiet as I could, but you still make quite a bit of noise. Finally, I ran about 100, 200 feet, hid behind some brush, and just kind of sat there. I sat there for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, after about, it seemed like at least 20 minutes, here comes a moose poking his nose out of the brush right in front of me, looking around. I couldn't believe it. I was thinking, Peter, no wonder you were so lucky. You knew what you're doing. So I went to raise the firearm, but before I got the sights on that one, another one popped up. Another one showed his head through. There were two bulls, small bulls, but they were bulls. They had antlers. I said, holy smokes. Well, so I dropped them both right there. And I figured, Peter needs meat, I need meat, and it sounds to me like the village would be very pleased to have extra meat. So I went ahead and dropped them both and gutted them. I cut off a hind quarter of one of them, packed them on my new backboard, and hoofed it back to Peter's place. I knocked on the door. Old Barney, he was just going crazy on the other side of the door, scratching on the door, yiping, barking, carrying on. And he could smell that meat. I bet he was hungry. He got probably sick of that doggone government salmon. So he was carrying on. Peter, I could hear Peter yell at Barney, tell him to shut up. And then he opened the door, and there Peter. Oh my gosh, another big toothless smile from ear to ear. He said, you got lucky. And I said, yeah, I just happened to get lucky because of you. So we got your moose. He says, all right. He said, I'll go get Ralph, and he's got a bunch of boys, and we're going to pack them out. I said, well, you better get more than just a few boys. There's two moose. And his eye just got big as a marble. I just, two moose. Oh boy, oh boy, oh. He didn't know, he was so flustered he didn't know what to do. So he said, well, I'll go get Ralph and his sons and his cousins and everyone. I said, all right, we'll go pack them out. It's quite a pack. So I waited for him to come back, and it looked like a whole army of men coming. young guys, lean and mean, ready to go to work, all with pack boards. And so they followed me out to the swamp. I showed them where the moose was, and they went to work cutting it up. I'll tell you what, they didn't leave anything there. They even took the heads. He says the heads are going to use for the potluck. And the first thing is, so they just totally took everything except the stomach content. And the interesting was, as we were sitting there cutting things up, they were nibbling on something. And I said, "What are you guys eating?" He says, "Oh, leaf fat." Leaf fat? What is a leaf fat? He says, "This is this white fat on the intestines of the moose. It's delicious. Here, have some." And I said, "Oh, sure, thanks." And I nibbled on it. It wasn't too bad. Nice powdery, dry, pure white fat. Probably good for you, give you energy. So we packed everything up, and they went back and got the heads later on, and the rest of the stuff that was left behind. They like to use the lower parts of their legs to build to make boots out of. So they went back, got those for their wives to get the skins off to make mucklucks. And I went back later on too with one of them, and there was absolutely nothing left, Hardy. And so I carried as much as I could back to Charlie's house again, or Peter Charlie. I'm sorry, I keep on calling him Charlie because it's Peter Charlie. So I went back to Peter's house and his cabin with another load, dropped it down, and I was kind of looking around, and asked Peter, where's the rest of the meat? Where'd those guys take it? He said, "Oh, no one stopped here." He says, "In this village, in our tradition, you keep what you pack." He says, "Community. No one owns anything. You just keep what you pack." He says, "We'll eat this. We'll finish this moose. It'll take a month to eat all this meat, and you'll go out and get some more. Maybe you'll get lucky again." I said, "Oh, okay." That's how this works. All right. Keep what you pack. I'll remember that. Next time I'll pack more. I didn't realize that. And so I got to know quite a few of the guys that helped pack the meat, and they invited me to come out with them some night, kind of like a men's night out. I said, "Sure, sure." And they told me where to go, and they'd be there. I said, "Okay." So I went over the area they told me, and there was nothing but a wooden shack with smoke bellowing out of it. I said, "It looks like a smokehouse to me. I don't think they'd be in there." And sure enough, from outside, I could hear them laughing and joking inside the smokehouse. So this ought to be interesting. So I knocked on the door, and they told me, "Come in." Heard one of them say, "Hey, crazy white man, glad to see you make it. Sit down, have some beaver fat." I said, "Oh, okay." And sure enough, we were inside of a smokehouse. They had a little fire going in the middle, and everyone was nibbling on meat, beaver fat, moose meat, whatever they had hanging up. It was delicious, delicious, just delicious food. They had salt. Some of them had coffee, some were smoking cigarettes, and some were smoking pipes. It was, a men's night out. Everyone sitting around a circle around the fire and eating meat. And this was what they considered a men's night out, rather than going to the bar and causing problems. All right. I said that was fine. That was fantastic. That's my type of night out. And then, so I got to know these guys, the younger guys, and they didn't really truly accept me, but I could tell they were starting to warm up to me. You know, Being a white guy, pretty out of place there. And so finally, I was invited to a potluck, and it was in a different village. And so I went, ate a lot of moose meat, and it was dark out, and I left the potluck. I was gonna walked back to a friend's house. The gentleman who brought me there was a young guy who helped me pack the moose, and all of a sudden, some guys were approaching me. There's four of them, native guys, young guys, and they all had knives. And I could just tell they weren't up to no good. And they started calling me, you know, white man, and obviously they had a pretty pretty good chip on their shoulder about white people, and they were going to get their revenge of whatever happened to them by some other white person. So and I was just there myself. I was kind of walking backwards, wondering what am I going to do. If I run, they're probably going to catch me. Um, I'll just kind of stand my ground, stand here and see what happens. I mean, there's nothing I can do but fight. But they got knives and I don't. So it's just, I couldn't believe it. And I don't know where these other guys that helped me pack the moose, they came up, they trotted up and stood in a line in front of me. And I didn't understand their language. But it didn't take long for those guys with knives to put them away and disappear in the dark. After that incident, I felt the community had finally accepted me. Um, so I spent the winter there, quit my job, and went trapping for the winter. And that's where the adventure started. You know, they say that adventures are from people who screw up. And I tell you, I had a whole winter of adventures. Everything from falling through thin ice to getting nearly starving to death. I mean, you name it. I had an adventure. And but these are stories that I'll continue next time. Thanks for stopping by and listening to this story. It's been a long time ago, and by telling the story, it sure sparked more memories. So stay tuned. See you next time, and God bless.